In the year of our Lord 1209, in the fortified city of Carcassonne, I, Brother Augustine, a humble scribe of the Cistercian order, keep my vigil not in a quiet scriptorium, but in the heart of a holy storm. My quill is not for illuminating psalms, but for recording the grim arithmetic of salvation. I am the notary to the Lord's wrath, the archivist of ashes. The air here in Languedoc is thick not with incense, but with the scent of fear and burning timber. They call this the Albigensian Crusade, a war blessed by Pope Innocent III himself, not to reclaim Jerusalem from the Saracen, but to purify the very heart of Christendom from a cancer he is deemed the Cathar heresy. I arrived in the train of the papal legate, Arnold Amaric, a man of such fearsome piety that his gaze feels like a physical weight. It was he who, when asked how to distinguish the faithful from the heretic in the city of Béziers, uttered the words that now guide our terrible work: Caedete eos, novit enim dominus qui sunt eios. Kill them all, for the Lord knows those who are his. And so we did. Thousands. The streets ran with blood. I recorded the number, 7,000, some say 20, the ink staining the parchment as the blood stained the cobblestones. My duty is to bear witness, to transcribe the sermons of the commanders, to list the confiscated properties, and to document the penances delivered unto the unrepentant. The Cathars, the bon hommes, as they call themselves, are a peculiar poison. They reject our holy church, our sacraments, our very cross. They see the material world as the creation of a wicked demiurge, a prison for the soul. They live in austere poverty, which makes their hypocrisy all the more galling, for they have seduced the nobility of this land, the counts of Toulouse and the viscounts of Carcassonne, with their lies. This is not merely a war of doctrine, it is a war for land, for power, for the very soul of France. And I, a man who sought only the quiet contemplation of God, am now the chronicler of its most violent chapter. My parchment is a battlefield, and every word I write is a soldier in the army of God. Brother Augustine is trapped in the machinery of a holy war, his faith tested by the horrors he is forced to document. He believes he is serving God, but the relentless river of blood is beginning to stain his own soul. The crusade marches on from its first bloody triumph at Béziers, its sights set on the formidable fortress of Bram. What new atrocities will be committed in the name of salvation? And how will the scribe's conscience weather the storm of fire and steel that is to come? The siege of Bram will teach a brutal lesson in terror. To follow Brother Augustine's descent into the heart of the crusade, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a moment of this chilling chronicle.
The Crusader army, a hungry beast of steel and faith, marched from the ruins of Béziers to the small but defiant castle of Bram. Its lord, a minor knight who had given shelter to Cathar perfecti, refused to surrender. The siege was short, a mere 3 days of bombardment before the walls were breached. The defenders, perhaps hoping for the mercy that was denied at Béziers, laid down their arms. They did not know our commander, Simon de Montfort, a man of iron will and a heart seemingly carved from the same cold stone as his fortresses. It was de Montfort who pronounced the sentence. He ordered that the 100 captured soldiers be blinded, their eyes gouged out with hot irons and daggers. But in his cruel theater, he showed a perverse sliver of mercy. One man, left with a single eye, was to lead this procession of the mutilated to the next Cathar stronghold at Cabaret, a living, bleeding message of the cost of defiance. I was commanded to observe and record the sounds. God forgive me, the sounds are etched into my very being, not the screams, those I had heard before, but the wet, popping sound of the instruments, the guttural animal moans that followed, and the absolute, suffocating silence of the blinded men as they were formed into a line. The one-eyed man, his face a mask of crusted blood and terror, was pushed to the front. He was given a staff and told to lead his brothers in darkness. As they stumbled away, a ragged column of human wreckage, I looked at the triumphant face of Simon de Montfort. I saw no rage, no hatred, only the cool, calculated satisfaction of a master craftsman who has completed a difficult task. This was not the heat of battle. This was a deliberate, pedagogical act. It was meant to teach, and it did. The castle of Cabaret surrendered without a fight. My hand trembled as I wrote the report. I described the military outcome with precision, but I could not bring myself to detail the sounds. Some truths are too vile for ink. That night, for the first time, my prayers were not for the souls of the heretics, but for my own. The calculated brutality at Bram has shaken Brother Augustin to his core. He is beginning to understand that the crusade is not just a fight against heresy, but a campaign of psychological terror designed to break the will of an entire region. The success of this tactic at Cabaret ensures it will be used again. As the crusade turns its attention to the mighty fortress of Minerve, perched on a rocky precipice, the stage is set for an even greater confrontation. What fresh horrors await when the Church's army lays siege to a fortress filled not just with soldiers, but with the revered Cathar perfecti? The fires of Minerva will cast a long and terrible shadow. To witness the event that will become the defining atrocity of the crusade, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The fortress of Minerve was a natural marvel, a stronghold perched on a narrow peninsula of rock surrounded by deep river gorges. It was considered nearly impregnable, but nearly is not entirely. Our siege engines positioned on the surrounding heights rained down stone and Greek fire upon the town for weeks. It was during this siege that I first saw the Cathar perfecti up close. A group of them, men and women, were captured in a sortie. They were not like the monsters our sermons described. They were calm, serene even. They wore simple, dark robes and looked upon us not with fear, but with a pity that I found more unsettling than any curse. The fall of Minerve was not achieved by storm, but by a single lucky shot from a massive trebuchet, nicknamed Malvoisin, Bad Neighbor, which smashed through the protective wall of the town's main cistern, draining the garrison's water supply. The Lord of Minerve had no choice but to surrender. As part of the terms of surrender, the soldiers and Catholic inhabitants were spared. But for the Cathar perfecti who refused to recant, there would be no mercy. Arnold Amalric himself presided. On the 22nd of July in the year 1210, a great pyre was built in a field below the town. 140 perfecti were led out. They were given a final chance to accept the Holy Mother Church and save their mortal lives. Not a single one stepped forward. They embraced each other, they prayed, and they walked willingly into the flames. I stood with my ledger, my duty to count, to record, but I could not. I watched paralyzed as the flames climbed their robes and the air filled with a smell far worse than that of burning wood. There was no screaming,
There was only a low, collective chanting of their prayers until the very end. This was not like the chaotic slaughter of Béziers or the calculated mutilation of Bram. This was a solemn, ritualized murder, a mass martyrdom conducted with the full authority of the Church. I returned to my tent and vomited. That night, I wrote only a single line in my chronicle. Today, 140 souls were returned to their evil god. The army rejoices. I did not rejoice. I felt the hollow, aching cold that the southern sun could not warm. The mass burning at Minerve has broken something within Brother Augustine. The serene faith of the Cathar martyrs has posed a question his own faith seems unable to answer. How can a lie inspire such courage? How can evil meet its end with such grace? The crusade, however, is unmoved by such philosophical dilemmas. Its next target is the greatest prize yet, the city of Lavoir, a bastion of Cathar resistance. Here the conflict will reach a new peak of savagery, and Brother Augustine will be forced to record an event so monstrous it will haunt him for the rest of his days. What happens when the machinery of holy war meets its most stubborn obstacle? The siege of Lavoir will be a descent into utter darkness. To see how far the Crusaders will go to purge the land, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The city of Lavour, under the stewardship of its formidable lady, Girard de Larac, and her brother, the knight Aymery de Montreal, was the heart of the resistance. For 2 months, Simon de Montfort's army laid siege to its stout walls. The defenders fought with a desperate fury, knowing the fate that awaited them. I recorded the daily skirmishes, the failed assaults, the slow, grinding progress of our siege works. The air was thick with the tension of impending slaughter. The end came in May of the year 1211. A section of the wall was finally undermined and collapsed. Our soldiers poured through the breach. What followed was a frenzy of killing that eclipsed even Béziers. De Montfort's rage, held in check during the long siege, was unleashed. Lady Girard, who had led the defense with such courage, was captured. There was no trial. De Montfort declared her a harborer of heretics and ordered her thrown down a well and stoned to death. I saw them drag her through the streets. She did not beg. She met her fate with a dignity that shamed her executioners. But the worst was reserved for her brother, Aymery, and his knights. 80 of them were captured alive. De Montfort ordered them all hanged from a single massive gallows constructed outside the city walls. As the bodies twisted in the wind, a grisly forest of the dead, the Crusaders turned their attention to the city's inhabitants. Between 400 and 500 Cathar perfecti who had taken refuge in Lavour were rounded up. A bonfire was built, so vast it could be seen for miles. They were all burned, all of them. The sheer scale of the killing was industrial. I stood there, my ledger in my hand, the numbers swimming before my eyes. 400, 500. The individual serenity I witnessed at Minerve was lost here in the collective horror. It was a harvest of death. I wrote down the numbers. I noted the execution of Lady Girard. I recorded the hanging of the 80 knights. But the words felt meaningless, inadequate to capture the abyss that had opened up before me. I was no longer a scribe for God. I was a clerk for the devil. The sack of Lavour represents the absolute nadir of the crusade, an orgy of violence that has stripped away any pretense of spiritual mission and revealed the raw, acquisitive conquest beneath. Brother Augustine's faith is in ruins, his soul mortgaged to the horror he documents. Yet the war is not over. The Count of Toulouse, the most powerful lord in the region, still holds out, and the Church is determined to break him.
As the political winds shift and the crusade becomes a war of thrones as much as a war of faith, what role remains for a broken scribe? The final act of this tragedy will play out on the fields of Muret, where the fate of Languedoc will be decided not by faith, but by the sword. To witness the climactic battle and the ultimate fate of Brother Augustine, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
In the years following Lavore, the crusade became a political mire. Simon de Montfort was now the Count of Toulouse by papal decree, but he ruled over a land that hated him. The true Count, Raymond VI, had allied with his brother-in-law, King Peter II of Aragon, a monarch so powerful and devout he had fought against the Moors in Spain. Peter's intervention transformed the conflict. This was no longer a war against heretics, but a war between Christian kings. The papal legates were uneasy, but de Montfort saw it as his final divine challenge. The two armies met on the fields outside the town of Muret on September the 12th, 1213. King Peter, confident in his numerical superiority and his royal dignity, led his knights in a reckless charge. I was kept far from the front, in the rear with the baggage train, but the sounds of the battle, the thunder of hooves, the clash of steel, the screams of men and horses carried clearly on the autumn air. It was a chaotic, bloody melee. By some miracle or some demonic intervention, de Montfort's smaller, disciplined force routed the Aragonese and Toulousain army. King Peter II of Aragon, a crusader against Muslims, was struck down and killed fighting a crusade blessed by the Pope he supported. When the news reached us, the camp erupted in jubilation. The legate Arnold Amalric declared it a sign of God's unequivocal favor. I was ordered to write a triumphant bulletin proclaiming the victory as a divine judgment. I picked up my quill. I wrote the words. I described the rout of the heretics and their ungodly allies. I recorded the death of the Aragonese king. But the words were ash in my mouth. I had recorded too much. I had seen the well at Lavore, the pyres of Minerve, the blinded men of Bram. This battle, for all its royal significance, was just more killing. God's favor looked indistinguishable from man's ambition drenched in blood. The victory at Muret secured de Montfort's power, but it secured nothing from my soul. I had become a hollow vessel filled with the echoes of screams and the ghost of burning flesh. The Battle of Muret has cemented the military victory of the Crusade, but it has extinguished the last flicker of Brother Augustine's belief in its divine purpose. He is a ghost haunting his own life, bound by his oath to record a history he now believes is a testament to evil. With the war effectively won, what becomes of a scribe who has lost his faith in the word of God and the men who claim to speak for him? The final reckoning for Brother Augustine is not on a battlefield, but in the quiet of an archive, where the weight of his own testimony threatens to crush him. Where can a man find absolution when he has been the secretary to a massacre? The final chapter of his story is one of quiet, desperate rebellion. To discover the fate of the scribe who recorded the horror, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The crusade did not end with a bang, but with a slow, administrative grind. Simon de Montfort was killed during a siege in 1218, his skull crushed by a stone from a mangonel, a fate many saw as divine retribution. I was reassigned to a monastery back in the north, far from the sun-bleached horrors of Languedoc. I was given a quiet cell and tasked with copying psalms. But the silence was worse than the noise of war.
In the silence, the memories screamed. I had brought my ledgers with me, the official record of the Albigensian Crusade. They were neat, precise, and sanitized. They spoke of heretics eliminated and strongholds reduced, but they did not speak of the one-eyed man, the chanting from the pyre, or the dignity of Lady Giraud. They were a lie, an official lie, and my name was on every page. I had been a faithful servant to that lie. One night, by the light of a single candle, I took out a fresh sheaf of parchment. I began to write again. But this time I did not write for the church or for the legate or for Simon de Montfort. I wrote for God, and I wrote for the dead. I began a new chronicle, one I knew would never be placed in the official archives. I called it The Secret History of the Black Cross. In it I told the truth. I described the sounds, the smells, the pity in the eyes of the perfecti, the cold calculation in the eyes of de Montfort. I confessed my own weakness, my complicity, my shattered faith. I wrote down every name I could remember, every face that haunted my dreams. It was my confession, my penance, and my final desperate act of rebellion. I am an old man now. The official chronicles I wrote are in the Vatican libraries, telling the story the Church wishes told. But my secret history is hidden here, in the walls of this monastery. I do not know if it will ever be found. Perhaps it is better if it is not. But I had to write it. For in the end, the greatest heresy is not a question of doctrine, but the silence that allows evil to be called good. My final entry is this: I was the scribe. I recorded the lies. But with this, my hidden testimony, I have at last told the truth. May God have mercy on my soul, for I have dwelled in the kingdom of man, and it is a kingdom of blood. The story of Brother Augustine is a journey into the heart of religious violence and the conscience of a single complicit man. It is a tale that asks where true faith resides, in the institutions that claim to represent God, or in the individual's struggle for truth in the face of overwhelming evil. The Albigensian Crusade sought to erase the Cathars from history, but through the secret testimony of a broken scribe, their story and the cost of their destruction echoes through the centuries. If you are drawn to the deepest and most dramatic stories of history, to the moments where the human spirit confronts the machinations of absolute power, then your search for understanding continues with us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are always exploring the darkest corners of history and the human experience.